So yeah, this is a treat to be here. And I thought I'd start us off with an Emily Dickinson quote, where she said, "There is no frigate like a book to take us lands away, nor any coursers like a page of prancing poetry. This traverse may the poorest take without a press of toll. How frugal is the chariot that bears the human soul." Which she said it better than I'm going to paraphrase it, but I think books are terrifying because they're so amazing. Because what else can take you out of your room to a place you've never been and put ideas in your head and make you feel for people you don't know and discover places you've never been to, and it all fits in your purse. It's a frugal chariot indeed. And so I thought it might be fun to start out by talking about a book you can remember that did all that for you, that changed your mind and made you look at the world in a different way. And just if anyone on the panel has a favorite one that they wanted to launch in with.
Probably for me, Harper's Ferry, Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird was a life-changing book for me. It helped me understand that the world was full of goodness and possibility. And so I would say that would be the book.
Yeah, it's hard to know which one to choose, right? I think so many of us who are lifelong readers who develop a habit for reading at an early age are going to struggle to narrow it down to our favorite 100 most transformative books. And I think, libraries are really good at cultivating a lifelong passion and curiosity for reading. And when I hear that quote you read, Alexandra, about, books as there's no frigate like a book, you said that was Emily Dickinson, this amazing poet, this total weirdo in American society who deserves to be widely read. I come away thinking about the broader notion that to think freely is to be able to read freely, and that it's important for all of us here in America, and despite this funny British accent, I'm a US citizen, for all of us here in America to be widely read and to be open-minded. And I think books are often the key to unlocking what you used other words to describe as empathy, the ability to walk in someone else's shoes, to see the world through their eyes for a minute or two. And to not be able to gain that perspective in the pages of this amazing technology that can fit in your purse is to be tempted to marginalize people who are not you, to minoritize people who are not you and have different perspectives and different experiences and different identities, to otherize, as scholars would call it, to otherize people who are not me. And I think that's a very dangerous perspective. And I think books are the antidote.
Yes, I'll add that I also have a list of books that have changed my life that go very, very long. And, I read a lot, and usually the book that has changed my mind is the book that I most recently read is the one that comes to mind immediately. I'm also thinking of all of the versions of myself that have been facilitated through reading, sort of the self that is a true crime reader, for example, and a big fan of The Stranger Beside Me and all those early true crime works that I used to read on the commuter rail, back and forth between Oakland and San Francisco, or Beloved, which is one of the books that completely made me see that there are facts and in history, and as a historian, you probably know this, right? There are the facts, and then there is the meaning that one makes from the facts, and the kind of meaning that can only be made by fiction. I think we all have what the sort of conflagration and the death that's happening in the Middle East on our minds, in Israel and Gaza. So thinking about Paul Celan and his poetry and what it has taught me about sort of language and how it can and can't meet disaster. His poetry has changed me, as well as a short, slim novel called Minor Detail by Adania Shibli, who is, I think, the truest book that can speak to the conflict there now. So I find that when I'm in, moments that feel urgent or emergencies or the world is changing and I don't really quite know, I grab a book. The book I've got going right now is V.S. Naipaul's A Bend in the River, which is teaching me a lot in dense language that's taken me quite a bit of time to move through, sort of both about the history of imperialism and also what that experience is like for different people. And I read a lot, so it's a long list.
No, I feel like I'm similar to, it sounds like everyone on this panel. I'm one of those people who's like, I'm always cheating on the books that I'm reading with other additional books that I'm reading as like a sideline. So I'll have like one in my bag and then I'll have one on my bedside table. And right now, I mean, one of my first loves as a reader, like one of the first ones, I'm like, I'm going to check this out from the library. And the library's like, are you sure you're ready? I'm like, oh yeah, I'm sure, with like the Robert Fagel's translation of the Iliad. And now I've got the Emily Wilson, and I'm just so excited for that. And I'm really enjoying both how just the language is so vivid, but also how it's a book that's about war, but it's about everything else by way of your war metaphors. It actually reminds me of a novel that I recently finished called Chain Gang All Stars, which is also like about horror, but there's a humanity and a beauty that comes out of like the analogy pointing you back to like the life and the value and beauty of life. Anyway, we could be excited talking about books this whole panel, and in a sense that is what we will be doing, but I wanted to also sort of go from person to person. So James McBride, first, congratulations on your new book. And I know one of the themes is that even in dark times, love and community are sustaining, but can you tell us more about your book and how it relates to reading?
Well, my book, it's about a community in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, and about a grocery store and how people coalesce around certain issues involving, anti-Semitism and race and disability or physical differences. Unfortunately, there aren't many libraries in this new book, but this new book wouldn't exist without libraries. And I thought it'd be important to point out to people that while the Heaven and Earth grocery store is about a community in Pennsylvania, it's a community that existed in 1936. The challenge now for those of us who love books is that libraries have become much more than libraries. Librarians have been very adept at creating these kind of community centers that have to do more than what they were initially set up to do. The libraries that I grew up with, you went to the file, you just went to the file cabinet, you found your book, you went in there, and if it was nice and warm, and sometimes they gave you a lollipop or whatever, but you could stay. This is New York Public Library. I don't know what they do in other places, and it's still like that in New York. The problem really is that librarians have become the last line of reason and discourse in a society that seems to be falling apart at the edges. And so I'm hoping that we'll discuss today some things that librarians can do to fight back against some of these horrible, ridiculously nasty, stupid people who are leaning their sort of stupid opinions on what people should and should not be allowed to read. So while I'm happy that people are reading my new book, I'm more concerned for the people who are behind me, the younger writers, including you, Alexandra, who as well as the two scholars among us who are concerned because we see what is happening. So I hope we can kind of curb stuff in that direction, because I've sold a lot of books. I'm happy, I have my hair curler from when I get my hair done, a hairpiece and all that. So there you have it.
Well, actually, maybe this is a good time to pull in Dr. Bell. I know there's like James, you were saying your novel set in 1936, at least in part of it. And so there's a history with book banning that I think we can learn from. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. Dr. Bell, about sort of what leads a book being banned in a one time versus another time, and how does that change, and what have been some surprising books that have gotten banned along the way, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, thanks for that question. Of course, I'm in the presence of two of my favorite authors here, so this is delightful for me. And I'm sure in my own potted history of what I think about the history of book bannings, Emily will also have her own thoughts from her professional perspective. But in short, I would say that the history of book bans in America is dark, it is long, and to my mind, it's deeply disturbing. As well. And so let's go backwards in time. Let's begin with the here and now. In my lifetime, since the late 1970s, attacks on ideologies expressed in books, I think, have become much more common. In Tennessee, school board recently banned the award-winning graphic novel, Mouse. I bet many of you know that book, Mouse, by Art Spiegelman, which is about the Holocaust, of course. And it was banned in Tennessee on the basis that the graphic novel featured one cartoon image of a naked mouse. We've also seen recent bans enacted around the country on novels aimed at adults by Maya Angelou, Mark Twain, Toni Morrison, I'm thinking of The Bluest Eye here rather than Beloved, Judy Blume, more of a teenage-focused author who was very important to me when I was a teenager, George R.R. Martin, and who writes, the Songs of Ice and Fire books, the TV show was based on Game of Thrones, and then J.K. Rowling, who I think unites adults and children, at least in book sales anyway. And it's not far removed from our own experience here in Maryland. In Carroll County, Maryland, a socially conservative group called Moms for Liberty, don't believe the name, Moms for Liberty recently succeeded in getting, I think, 56 books temporarily taken off the shelves at school libraries here in Maryland. So this cuts pretty close to home. And Emily's group, the American Library Association, has been at the forefront of calling attention to the fact that our house is on fire. I'm going to use some of Emily's numbers here, if she'll forgive me. The ALA documented, I think, 1,269 demands to censor library books and resources in just 2022 alone. If that number means nothing to you, 1,269, it's the highest number of attempted book bans since the American Library Association began compiling data about censorship about, 20 years ago or so. And it's double the number of challenges reported just the year before. So seemingly exponential growth in book challenges. And each challenge can represent challenges to multiple books. The ALA counted 2,571 unique titles being challenged by those challengers. And it's important to note here that most of the books being challenged were written by authors who were female, or authors who were people of color, or authors who were queer identifying. And 40% of those challenges last year sought to remove or restrict more than 100 books at a time. So one challenge can do an inordinate amount of potential damage. And as I see it, and I think there's some support from watchdog groups like the ALA for this comment, the goal of these challenges seem to be to remove books from America's public libraries and school libraries that are about difficult issues in race relations, difficult issues in history, which is what I do for a living, as well as books that tackle important, relevant subjects like gender identity and sexuality, and of course, reproductive health, if they do not meet the personal approval of whoever is challenging them. And what I want to really emphasize to folks listening at home or watching is that everything I've just described, it's new. It's new. Prior to the 1970s, most challenges, most bans focused much more narrowly, either on obscenity or explicit depictions of sexuality. Two of the books most commonly challenged before 1979 and the decades before would be James Joyce's Ulysses, which is a modern classic, of course, and Lady Chatterley's Lover by the English novelist D.H. Lawrence, which is certainly sensual and intoxicating, but is aimed at adults. And it's not an HBO show full of nudity. It's words on a page here, a big distinction perhaps. And if we keep scrolling back, I'll try and wrap up soon, I promise. If we keep scrolling back, the catalog reconstitutes itself to something pretty dark and monstrous in the 1800s. In the era of American slavery, so the decades before 1865, it was very common for white supremacists to ban books with strong anti-slavery content. Folks listening will know the example I'm going to give. You've all heard of it, Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, attempt made to ban that novel for its very frank depiction of just how awful American slavery was. There's a less well-known to us text written by a Black Bostonian in 1829 called Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World. It was written by David Walker, a free Black anti-slavery activist, and it was banned up and down the slave states, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Louisiana. In one of those southern slave states, Georgia, a new law passed after this New England pamphlet was in circulation required any ships docking in Georgia to be quarantined while all arriving Black sailors and passengers were basically searched to see if they had any copies of this incendiary anti-slavery pamphlet on them. And similar laws also worked to restrict literacy access, reading education materials to enslaved Black Americans in the slave states of the South. And that's an important link. And that's why I'll pause here to say that banning books and trying to deter people from reading, they are the same thought. They are the same thought. And there's been a long history in this country of trying to restrict access to literacy, which is the first step to be able to read freely among enslaved Americans, Black Americans, and other minority groups. Although the upside of that, of course, is that many of those minoritized groups have seized on literacy and reading and books as a path to their own liberty. And so it's become an act of resistance. But we shouldn't be thinking of literacy and reading in the 21st century as an act of resistance. I thought we would move beyond that by now.
Emily, I know some of those were your numbers. If you had any sort of insight in terms of both, how do these books come to be on the shelves, I guess, before they get challenged? Like, what's the process that goes into that? Are people just willy-nilly throwing them there? Or in fact, does a lot of thought go into this?
A lot of thought goes into it. You know, most of my academic work has been around knowledge organization and practices of cataloging and classification work. And I heard this anecdote about Flickr, the old photo site once, that the most popular tag on Twitter, do you have a guess? Me. People tag their photos me so that they can hit me and retrieve all the photos of themselves, right? And so people catalog things according to what they want and how they understand the world, which is how I build my own personal book collection, right? It's like books that I want that go on my shelves. But books in libraries are collections not for the individual, but for the public. So those collections for any library, a school library, is built by the school librarian who tries to build a collection that supports the curriculum, that supports the reading needs of the youth, right? Like that has graphic novels for kids who like that. It has the full run of Beverly Cleary for kids like that. I was a kid like that. It has the atlases and the encyclopedias, and the collection is built for the students. And it's the same with public libraries, right? That you look at your community, and the librarian's job is to find out who's in the community, what kinds of books they read, what kind of languages they read in, what other kinds of information resources they might want, and then to collect those things. So librarian positions are professional positions. I have a master's degree in librarianship. One of the classes I had to take was collection development, how to think critically about a community and build a collection to meet its needs. So part of what we're seeing, I think, with this sort of the contemporary book banning sort of context that Dr. Bell was talking about is that you've got moms, the ostensible mom for liberty. I am also a mom for liberty. I'm a mom and I, believe in freedom and all of those things. But we have ostensible moms wanting to make the decision for reading for the entire community. But of course, they're not thinking about the entire community, which is how you end up with people saying, well, we don't need books about genderqueer people because we don't have any genderqueer people in this neighborhood or in this town or in this village. But if you talk to any librarian, they'll tell you those might not be people that everybody sees, but they're definitely people inside the community. I'm from Idaho, is my home state, and the little mountain town in McCall, Idaho is where my father retired. And the right in that area, the Donnelly Public Library is run by a woman named Sherry Shaline. And she was telling me a story about, she hosts an evening once a month for trans and queer youth to come and hang out with each other in the library. She gets 3 to 5 kids a month at that event. She has one rule: you have to be reading a book. That's it. So these are people who have, I'm sure, so many rules trying to control the fact that they are different from other people, right? Because that's, I think, at the root of this is like, we want to ban books because we don't want people to be different from us, but people are incommensurably different from one another. And so instead of putting a bunch of rules about how you have to call yourself and how you have to dress, her rule is you got to be reading a book. And she told me that for the kids who come to that reading group, that's the only place in their entire lives that they can use the names that they use for themselves, the pronouns that they use for themselves, and have those be respected by the other kids in the group. That's the only place. So you've got so many libraries like that are the sort of home for people who experience themselves as different from the rest of the community. And librarians curate both the collections that will enable us to read about ourselves, that being a fundamental way that we come to understand ourselves is reading books about ourselves. I think, as a lesbian, Dykes to Watch Out For is like my touchstone book, right? Like, it's the reason I have this haircut, and I have this haircut because I saw it in a book, and it was in the book because I got this haircut, right? Like, it is community making, and it's like meaning making for me. So not only the collections, but also the space. And I'll end with a number that I heard from a report from the Human Rights Campaign a couple of months ago that I can't get it out of my head. They did a survey of trans and gender variant students, and 60% of them reported feeling unsafe at some point in school. 90% reported feeling safe in the library. So they're a haven for our most vulnerable. They're absolutely crucial and important. And we need a school library in every school. We need a certified school librarian, and I also think, like, when we're talking about banning books, we also need to be honest about all the different ways that we can ban a book, right? I'm here in Chicago at the American Library Association Executive Board meeting. This city has 500 schools. It has fewer than 100 school librarians. So as much as we want to really focus on the sort of censorship and book banning piece that is absolutely critical to combat at this time, I think if we think a little bit more broadly about what it means to disinvest in public institutions so that they are left, as James was saying, as the only institution standing, not able to fulfill our core mission around reading as well as we could have if we didn't also have to provide disaster relief, access to broadband internet. The only place to go when it's too hot outside or too cold outside is inside the school library. So we need, I think, to connect what's happening in these individual sort of dramatic book burning kinds of stories to a much longer story of bipartisan disinvestment in the public.
I couldn't agree more. I think that, there's a part of me that says, what's the point of banning books when a 10-year-old can just get on his phone and just watch porn? And which, because my neighborhood in Red Hook, they closed the library down. They didn't tell anybody. They just shut it down, and they're going to rebuild it. In the meantime, where the kid's going to go. I mean, there's a bigger question here that this banning of books business has marched to the forth, has presents us with, and this is, how do we vote and how do we feel strong enough to protect those who have drawn the line, and to protect the small places where our young people are protected? Just because some lady, didn't get Twinkies when she was 10 years old or something, and she decides to stand up at a school board. I mean, school board meetings are where everyone lets their hair down, and you hear all these little psychotic episodes of people yelling about this, that, and the other. And most of the time, they end up doing nothing with their lives. They don't do this, nothing people. So why are we allowing nothing people to dictate the course of direction in terms of what our kids should read and how many libraries we should have? I mean, the larger question really, as I think about it, is that when you have a society where you stop a baseball game or a football game and you march a soldier to the front of everyone, and then you salute them and you say, we want to thank you, soldier. Why aren't librarians the people? They're the protectors. Why aren't teachers the ones who are marching? Why do we allow this kind of behavior? So if we really want to combat it, we just started in our own communities. We started right at home, and we make sure that our local politicians and local people whom we elect are people who respect the fact that we're going to march soldiers in the middle of the floor and give them, their just due, which they deserve. Let's put a cop and a teacher and a fireman and a librarian next to them as well, so that the discourse is a healthy one, as opposed to us being always reactive. We're always reactive. We're reactive because we're not asking the right questions. The right questions are the ones that I'm sorry, I can't remember your name, but the person with the glasses, the other person. Well, actually, the second person. You understand? I mean, those are the questions. Yeah, Emily. These are the questions we should be asking, because we have to protect our librarians, and they're protected when we ask the bigger questions as to why this stuff is happening in the first place. The underlying questions, and these underlying questions would be, and I'll stop here: racism, sexism, classism, and this whole business of identity. What is America? What is America really? What is the country really? Or what is really the country? I mean, and so we can't answer them all. We can certainly start by being aggressive on the local level and making sure that some of these bigger questions are at least floated out to our neighbors and the people we care about.
And a thing that struck me, I think related to what both of you were just saying, is that they were saying just 11 people I read were responsible for most of the book challenges in the school year 2021 to 2022. And I became obsessed with this. I kept thinking, if it's just 11 people, we can keep them busy somehow. I've got to create an unbannable book that's 2,000 pages long. And in order to figure out if it contains anything you want to object to, you have to do a bunch of math problems. And so it takes you a decade to read it. And this came to me in a dream, and I'm I don't think it makes sense, but I'm just we've got to be able to occupy these 11 people's time, because it multiplies out, and the resources involved in their complaints are taking up hundreds of people's time who are supposed to be on the front lines of so many other things, as we keep talking about. So I guess one question I had was, what do we is it about? It's not just about the books and the people who are going and challenging these books. It's also about the ideas, as you were saying, that are contained in them. And one of the first ways that people try to target ideas is, like Orwell was always saying with this sort of newspeak, is that you try to sort of put up a palisade around the words used to describe that idea. And you think, well, if we can ban that, then maybe we'll just never know about this thing existing. So, but have you, from readers, have you been hearing anything from the people on the receiving end of this? Are kids fighting back? How about student groups?
I am totally inspired by Students Engaged to Advance Texas, I think it is, SEAT. It's a group of students organizing around censorship in Texas, which is, of course, one of the hot spots. And I had lunch in the Dallas area with Datavian Daniels, who is the youth ambassador for this year's Banned Books Week. And he tells a fantastic story, right, about how he heard about all the book banning stuff going on, and then so went to the school library to see if the books that have been banned were on the shelves in his school library. So he gets to his school library, but it doubles as the Muslim prayer room. And so in order to make space for students to pray, and he's also Muslim, so he prayed there also, but didn't kind of, I think, connect that it was a library. And so they had to move the bookshelves together to make room for people to pray. And so he couldn't even get down, up and down the aisles to see whether or not the banned books were on his shelf. Right. So that's what I mean about we've got to make the problem, I think, more complex, which is I'm glad that the conversation is going in that direction. But he and his colleagues in seat have been in the Texas State House constantly. The last legislative session, they're doing a special legislative session this month. So they were there last year. This year, they're always in Austin making the argument for the right to read. Because I think the 11 people, the way to outnumber, we have to outnumber them, right? And we have to be as relentless about the things that we care about as they are about the things that they care about. And so they've been relentless in organizing people to go to school board meetings, to library board meetings, to the State House, just to make sure that there's a loud voice. Now, are they winning? Is Texas like, Texas is, many of these states, like the other thing I think a lot about is how we just don't know what it's going to take to get the win, right? That we've got all these students doing a lot of good work in Texas, but there's still real issues around the freedom of access to information, the freedom to be queer, the freedom to be Black and survive, right? Like, those are still problems, but I'm inspired anytime I see organized groups working really hard. And we know that if we organize enough people that we can win, because the book ban stuff is deeply unpopular. Survey after survey, nobody likes it. Nobody, because like if you have a kid, you look at your kid and you think, a book is not the biggest problem that this child is facing, right? As a parent myself, I'm like, I don't think the book is the issue that's making the world unsafe for my kid. And so we know we have the numbers. So I think for me, it's just a matter of getting the numbers together.
And I was wondering, Richard, like in the past, oh, good, it looked like you were going to jump in, but I'm like, what has worked in the past, and how do these usually fizzle out when they fizzle out?
Well, fighting a civil war to end race slavery was one way to make banning books with anti-slavery themes go away, but hopefully we don't have to go rehearse that a second time. If I could make 2 points based on where we are in this discussion, in response to your last question, Emily's response to it, I think, sometimes the discourse around books works from the presumption that books with unfamiliar material can indoctrinate young readers to a way of life depicted in them. That reading about Holden Caulfield makes you say heck and darn a lot, or that reading about books with queer characters or trans characters is going to turn young readers queer or trans. And I would say that books are powerful, but they're not that powerful. And if texts did have those magical powers, it's ironic that books about magic have sometimes been the target of these book bans, then educators would be able to use these powerful magic texts to get their students to do basic stuff like use apostrophes correctly. I just don't think that we should be scared of ideas and perspectives that are not our own. And then if I could circle back even further into the conversation, Alex, I love to travel back in time, as you can tell, as an historian. I was thinking about what Emily was saying about collection development policies and what's appropriate. And she was acknowledging that there have been hundreds and hundreds of book challenges. And people listening might want to hear a little bit more about what the difference is between a book ban and a book challenge. And I'm no expert, so Emily will surely correct me here. But my sense is that challenges are when people file, for lack of a better word, a complaint about a book in a system with the hope that it's taken off the shelves and access is restricted. And a ban is when a book has been removed from the shelves and restriction has been enacted. And I'm, very staunchly against almost all book bans you can think of, but I'm not personally against book challenges. I think with any bureaucratic procedure, like collections development policies that decide how books get into a collection, there should be a procedure where users, readers can seek to modify or appeal whether a decision has been rendered accurately for a particular book to enter a collection. I think that's the nature of any thriving democracy, right? That you can have a back and forth between an institutional power, in this case, a library system, and a user and a reader. And it's the responsibility of that institutional power, the library system, to then manage, for lack of a better word, an appeals process fairly and transparently and openly. And my sense is that, every library system worth its salt not only has a very clear and transparent collections development policy that you can find online and read for yourself. I've got the Brooklyn Public Library collection development policy on my desk while I'm sitting here in College Park. But also have an appeals procedure where you can see how a book challenge is supposed to work its way through the system to be rendered either as being upheld, that the book shouldn't have been there in the first place, or dismissed, that no, the professionals made the decision correctly at the first time. I'm fine with book challenges, or I don't like it, though, when a small number of individuals dump huge amounts of appeals work onto professionals, but it is an appropriate process. What's less appropriate, of course, is when elected officials from across the ideological spectrum then it also impose top-down restrictions that do end runs around that challenge procedure. And we've seen rather too much of that in recent years as well. And that makes me very nervous. It smacks to me of authoritarianism.
You're exactly right.
Like to,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I agree with everything that's been said here. But I'd like to, if you'd allow me to push the discourse into a wider spectrum, because I'm not as smart as you two are. Alex and I are both former. She's a journalist, and I'm a former journalist. We know a little bit about a lot of stuff. We don't know a lot about much. The problem is that the cell phone is the tool of oppression, and it spreads oppression disguised as free thought. And really, in my neighborhood, I mean, I can only speak for Red Hook, Brooklyn, which is a housing project. Well, Red Hook is two neighborhoods. It's a housing project, and then it's well-to-do people who move around the housing project. And sometimes we come together and sometimes we don't. Our problem is the same problem that exists all over the place. Those of us who are concerned about book banning are not plugged into the fact that kids line up in front of sneaker stores at 4:30 in the morning to get brand new tennis shoes. And until we figure out that bridge, then we'll always be vulnerable to people who are to the fascist elements that are pushing in on the queer community and every other community that is not WASP-like and eating the mythology of what a great American should be. And that leaves librarians as the most vulnerable people in this environment. If we could talk about some ideas in that way, I think I'd just be curious. Actually, I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are about that, because I don't have much to offer other than that.
I think there is a fascinating sort of trickle out from social media and the way that people use it, like both whether it be like TikTok or whether you're getting your use on the platform formerly known as Twitter, but like there's some things that, like on TikTok, you're not allowed to use certain words, and so sometimes then you'll see people like in the actual conversation in real life not using those words, and so like the way that content is censored online, you wind up censoring yourself like in real life in the world in a very Orwellian and sort of alarming way. So I do think as you move away, because the threat is in some ways both like people who are proactively coming for reading, and the fact that the way we're getting information now isn't reading, it's watching videos, it's doing all these other things that aren't the words. So yeah, I guess broadening it out, what do we do about the cell phone? And I wish I had a better answer as somebody who's just like, well, I promise you I'll be better if I'm a series of lines of text on a page than I will be if I'm a video that's trying to hold your interest for anywhere from 7 seconds to a minute. I guarantee that the first thing is going to do better than the second thing. And so, but it's hard to get people's attention from the all sucking device.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody whose entire world is Times New Roman 12-point type, like that's just how I see things. I'm with you there. Like I just don't have any sort of visual sense at all. And but you know, one thing I would say, James, is I'd be interested in when that Red Hook branch library opens again, if the lines in front of that library before it opens to access the computers there might approach the length of the lines for the sneaker store. I mean, probably not. But I think that those of us who don't rely on the public library for access to the internet, this thing that we all have in our hands, that the library actually is a lifeline for people in such a way that they line up for it. And I think that's like, I guess, worth saying.
I'm sure the library is a lifeline in that regard. I have no doubt about that. And I have no doubt that there will be a line of people who need, who will line up. Listen, librarians are very, very, very creative people, and we're 4 very creative, smart people here. I'm only interested in solutions, like what can we do to free librarians up so they're not vulnerable to what is happening. I just want to make sure that we see what happens is these people are very clever. They chuck a spear into a crowded party, and then they wait for the reaction. And then we react. We always go, oh my God, we got to stop the spears. And we stop the spear. And then they chuck a hand grenade and a smoke bomb and a can. And we just keep reacting. We have to be active and not reactive. So I'm interested in the active solution. I don't.
Yeah. I mean, I think like I agree that librarians and library workers are in particularly vulnerable places. Just over the weekend, I learned about a library director in Saline County, Arkansas, who was fired from her position as library director because she refused to remove LGBTQ plus materials from her library. And she is one of legions of library workers across the country who have left, who've resigned, been fired. I was in Greenville, South Carolina this week, where heard the same story.
Then where is the ALA strike force? Then the ALA needs a legal strike force that goes out and says, okay, this librarian was fired. I'm going to come in with Justice Department folks, and we're going to get her job back. That's what we need. We need to be aggressive. This is a kind of war, and so we need to address it as a kind of war.
And ALA has significant resources like that we're devoting to this fight, including new funding for a Lawyers for Libraries program that will do something similar to what you've described. I think long term, the best way to protect librarians is to have more librarians, because it's what you're saying. It's not just the book banners, but it's also how libraries have become sort of catchment for the disinvestment in the public, right? We are where people come when they have nowhere else to go. Right. And when I talk to public library workers, they say the best way to reduce incidents at the library is to have a librarian standing there. Right. That the more people presence, and I live in New York City, too. And we know this, right? Like when there are a lot of people around, it's very unlikely that anything bad's going to happen just because you've got numbers, you've got eyes on each other. And so I think when I think about longer term solutions, one is building the power of library workers by expanding the workforce. And that's hard to do, right? In a world that does not want to pay for public services, that undercuts and weakens public institutions to such an extent that they can't meet the needs of the public, and then let's wash our hands of them. The library can't do anything. So there are like a million potential solutions. I think they have to be electoral, right? We need to elect people to library boards and to school boards that care about libraries and schools. And that includes higher ed, where, I think the book bans, you have to see them, in the same universe as what's happening at West Virginia University and the gutting of like academic programs at universities across the country. Like I just was this morning reading the plan for UNC Greenville. It's so devastating, right? To see what's happening to higher ed. So seeing all of those struggles as like linked, and then having people in positions of power that care about the things that we care about. So I grew up in Idaho, where we've always had white supremacist separatists, like that's just a mark of the state. But when I was growing up, they were separatists. They lived in the wilderness, and now they have taken power in local contexts and all the way up to the federal government. You see it internationally, right? We see a global rise of the fascist right. And so I think having people who aren't that, you know, effectively running for office and controlling resources and controlling power, I think is important. But, you know, that's, I guess, a little vague, but.
And I was inspired by everything that Emily said there, and how it worked at different levels, sort of macro, micro there as well. It occurred to me to amplify the notion that, you know, educational, in the broader sense of education, not just within schools, but among young people and citizens of all ages, I do think is suffering structural disinvestment of unprecedented proportions and declines, whether that's K-12, whether that's college, whether it's libraries and other vital citizenship utilities like them. And where that sends us, if we don't work to elect candidates who are opposed to that and propose something different, is a very dark place, I think. Alexandra's paper has on its masthead the phrase, "Democracy dies in darkness." And you could say that about what we're talking about today here as well, that if we don't give our citizens the means and opportunities to arm themselves with critical thinking skills, then we end up with a political system in which democracy is slowly withering on the vine because of the lack of citizenship skills amongst the populace to properly engage. And this possibility also has a long history, of course. I'm going to take us back very briefly to the American Revolution, which I love to do in any context. Tom Paine, famous to most Americans as the author of Common Sense, the famous pro-independence pamphlet, he had a lot to say about the value of educating citizens and why this should be effectively the number one priority of any respectable political system. I'm going to quote him here. He said that a nation under a well-regulated government should permit none to remain uninstructed, uneducated. It is monarchical and aristocratical government only that requires ignorance for its support. Today, we'd say that authoritarianism strives on the support of the uneducated and ignorant. And I think we do not embrace totalitarianism, I hope, and therefore the alternative is staring us in the face. And we have an opportunity every time we go to the ballot box to ask tough questions of who we're going to cast our vote for and what their policies are on these different investments. And so much of this is local as well, not just federal. It's, you know, who your state delegate is. It's who serves on the school board in local districts. It matters so much. And then the other part that Emily brought out to me was a legal and constitutional response as well. I do not have a law degree. I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to this, but my sense is that the First Amendment protects not only our right to express ideas, which is the way we commonly think about it, but also our right to receive ideas freely, right? To not be kept in the dark. And that's not my interpretation. My understanding is that the Supreme Court of the United States has held that the Constitution requires a procedure to guarantee all this. And yet, so what they're saying is that that book bans are unconstitutional, effectively. And if that is the precedent, and again, I'm not a lawyer, if that is the precedent, then we need to make sure that we are funding, you know, library legal defense funds who can take that argument about what the First Amendment means into courtrooms across the country. So when push comes to shove, you know, no one misses their opportunity to stand up and oppose this.
I think so. We heard a variety of different steps that you could take. It sounds like electoral, getting involved with your local school board, just generally trying to be as invested in maintaining the thing as people are in dismantling the thing. And I think, because taking a step back, also historically, like the idea of a public library as an institution in sort of the geological scale of time, well, in the geological scale of time, everything's recent, but even in the sort of historical scale of time, the idea of like a public free place where you can go and have access to books is not, I mean, it's recent in the sense that America is recent, which is kind of recent, like historically. And so I think from what gives me sort of optimism about it, it's the kind of thing that if we were just to start from scratch today, you would never say, hey, what if we all donated a chunk of money from our funds that we've raised and we have a building where you go and you get all these services for free and there's books there. Like, it would just never occur to us. But we have this, like, it's already on the ground. And so now people are trying to dismantle it. But like the fact that we have this beachhead there against ignorance and all that, I think is kind of encouraging, because like there's a thing there that you have to remove, as opposed to we have to build this. So I think, what else can we do what else gives you hope, I would say, when you look at this situation?
Well, I would say that, well, that's certainly a hopeful and healthy perspective to have. I would add that if we are in a situation where we're out, where the fortress is surrounded by, malevolence, then why don't we develop those people who can defend the indefensible? Like, what kind of programs can we commit ourselves to as people who love books to develop the kind of young people that will actually love books and to develop it? Not the young. The problem is not the young people. The problem really is us, who we vote for. And, I mean, I don't want to have these conversations about what they're doing. We know what they're doing. I want to focus on what we need to do. So what do we need to do to it sounds to me like we need to develop, we need to vote for people who represent our interests. We need to re-examine the whole business of public school, because public school means schools without libraries. That whole business in Houston, Texas, where when they want to discard the library and put the kids in detention, and the head of the school system in Houston says they don't read. I mean, the fact that this guy even has a job is just disgraceful. I mean, someone who talks about his children and says they don't read should not be commissioner or head of any school system. So what do we need to do to sort of to turn the Titanic away from the iceberg? I think that's really the most useful discussion to have here, because we know what the problem is. So I'll leave it to my three esteemed colleagues to push the boat in that direction.
I like what you said, Alexandra, about libraries as like things that actually exist, right? Because I think that is part of what makes them a target, is because they're a thing you can actually resist. Because we know it can't be about the books, right? Because as James was saying, like, if I can pick up my cell phone and watch hardcore pornography, no matter who I am, like, it's clearly not about the books, it's about something else. And I think it's about wanting to restore a vision of the US that excludes Black people, people of color, Indigenous people from the public, from the definition of the public. It wants to exclude LGBTQ plus people. And where are you going to fight that fight? And I think that our opponents see the library as a place where you can fight that fight. You can actually, there is something happening in the library that is about equity and belonging and inclusion into the American public and the American story, that you can go to the library and throw a big fuss around it, right? Like, libraries are material things. That's why I love working in them. It's like, my sister is a gender studies professor, and she has like big ideas about gender, but like the rubber meets the road. When you come to the library, you're going to buy a book and you got to catalog it somewhere, has to sit somewhere on a shelf. Like, we make material decisions. I was very inspired about a story that came out of Danvers, Massachusetts, a couple of weeks ago, where the library hosted a drag queen makeup hour. So not a story hour, but one where you come and you learn how to apply makeup. And it's like an outreach activity. We're trying to get people into the library who haven't used it before. It's like fun. So of course, you know what happened right? Like people who want to fight against the existence of trans people in the world, right? That's really what their fight is. One, you know, and the site they've chosen for their battle is this drag queen makeup hour. And organized parts of the community just got wind and fought back, meaning the organized labor brought people, the organized faith communities brought people, the environmental movement in the town, like people who were organized around other issues that maybe weren't the library, but are related, obviously. And they got 350 people to form a wall of love around the library. They just surrounded it, right? The old Hands Across America thing. And it meant that the dozen or so protesters who showed up, they had no chance, right? Like we were vastly outnumbered. So I think the fight is happening in the material space. And so there's the electoral thing, but then there's also like, when you hear something like this happening, you got to go to the library, you know, to show up there, hold hands with the people around you and make sure that the people who want to tear it down can't get in.
I was thinking when you said hands across America as one of these platitudes that can actually mean something in certain contexts, Emily, I was thinking of another platitude that can actually mean something in certain contexts, that the children are the future. There you go. There's the platitude. And, you know, I'm an educator, so I teach 18 to 21-year-olds, which is very different from what my wife does as an 8th grade teacher, but it still counts. It still counts. And I would say that while you know it's absolutely true that you know the way young people digest culture and ideas has changed materially in terms of that device they have in their hand and the way they spend their time and attention in our lifetimes, it's changed almost beyond recognition. That there is something intrinsic and innate to being a young person just starting out on a journey of life that imbues young people in any country, in any time, in any place with, number one, I think a natural curiosity about how the world works and how big this place is and the diversity of experiences that one can encounter on this planet and in this plane, but that also is naturally suspicious of conventional wisdom, that is naturally suspicious of entrenched power and hierarchies. I think that curiosity and that suspicion come inbuilt to most young people. And I think for any educator, that's the greatest gift we can get from our students, is the chance to sort of work with those gifts of curiosity and suspicion and rebrand them as critical thinking, which is another way to push those two terms together. So I think, you know, all the educators I know at various different grade points have very similar experiences when they offer to their students documents, books, novels, whatever media it might be, that present their students with things they haven't encountered before. And they find that those young students not to be close-minded and disengaged and incurious about what they're interacting with. They generally find them to be the opposite, and to homogenize a variety of experiences. A comment every educator hears is, "Wow, I'd never thought of it like that before." Not, "I've bought the new line, hook, line, and sinker. I've been thoroughly indoctrinated," or whatever text you've just given me. But wow, I'd never thought about those arguments, and now I'm thinking about them and making up my own mind. So all of us engaged in this fight over citizenship and education, you know, have one asset which those who come at this from the opposing view don't have, which we have, you know, tens of millions of young Americans who are naturally curious and suspicious, and I hope open-minded as well. So we have that going for us.
I think as we're ending our initial portion of the conversation and moving towards the Q&A, I know people have been sending some in. I was wondering, so James, when you're writing, do you ever think, oh, this could be banned, this could fall? Is that something that it enters into your thinking at all, or not whatsoever?
Not at all. No, I have to be free to think of, you know, especially fiction. You know, you're always looking to the common things that drive people, and the common things that drive people are beyond, you know, the petty, cruel, evil people who are trying to ban books. I couldn't think of people like that and write books. I mean, why, you know, I don't think of that at all. I mean, maybe other writers do. You know, I think the larger, when you're creating a book, it's different. The thought process is, you know, when Dr. Bell is talking, his thought process of education is, you know, he has so much experience. He's been doing it so long that he understands how these minds work and how critical thinking can fold into some. But when you're writing a creative novel, you just can't think. You have to think of, you know, you're dealing with how do these worlds connect, and what is the connective tissue of, you know, of this particular society or community that you're writing about.
Yeah, I think I can't imagine starting out with your imagination in a defensive crouch. So I'm glad to hear that you don't do that. And
I'm not, listen, I am not worried about, just so you know, even though I'm like yelling about solutions, I'm not worried about the banned book people, because they're not going to stop people from being who they are. When Paul Manott wrote many years ago, I read, you know, when AIDS was here, a guy named Paul Manott wrote a book called Becoming a Man. He didn't live very long. He was a very militant queer man. He was a superbly gifted writer. And he was one of those who fell on his sword a long time before people started paying attention to HIV. I saw a lot of my friends die of AIDS. Nobody cared. It wasn't anything you talked about. People would just, whatever their color. But we prevailed. And so now we have a new queer community that's here, and they're strong. I'm not worried about the queer ones. I'm not worried about them. I'm not worried about the banned book people. What I'm concerned about is how we can find an alley so that because some of us will fall, but those of us who get through, I'm concerned about what kind of pavement we leave for them. So what Dr. Bell was talking about is something that was in my head that will stay with me after this conversation. The whole critical thinking, and how do you fold this critical thinking into the minds of young people who are the ones standing out there at 4:30 in the morning to get tennis shoes? Because if once we get them into the library, we won't have to worry about the banned book folks. And it'll happen. It won't happen in my lifetime, but it'll come.
And so I think Emily, I know if you had any more thoughts about what regular people can do to support the freedom to choose books. I know we've covered a lot of it, so you may say head forward to the Q&A, but I just wanted to make certain that
I have two things. First, the American Library Association. Why do I have balloons?
I don't know why you have balloons.
I enjoyed that small celebration of me.
Can you do that again? That's
I
awesome.
don't know. Right.
Just say I have two things and see what happens.
Watching me turn into that cat, remember from the early
I'm not a cat.
I'm not a cat. Anyway, so the American Library Association has a Unite Against Book Bans campaign at uniteagainstbookbans.org. And if you go there, you will see a number of different toolkits for things that you can do, everything from a yard sign that you can print and put in your yard to indicate to your neighbors that you care about the right to read, to tips and talking points for speaking with the media. Because a lot of these fights are hyper local, and we need people to be on their local news and on their local radio to share their support for the right to read. It's also, if you sign up, we're using the platform as a way of targeting people who are in an area where we're hearing about intellectual freedom challenges to mobilize them around particular activities. And then the second thing is that since 1970, the American Library Association has had this Leroy C. Merritt Humanitarian Fund. This is a fund that provides direct material support to library workers facing employment discrimination, either on the basis of their identity, but primarily due to their support for intellectual freedom. And I have friends who've accessed this in the last couple of years, people who were put on administrative leave for their ostensible distribution of pornography, just simply for holding the copy of the book Genderqueer and putting a picture of it on the internet. So there are librarians across the country facing that. And the Merit Fund was able to provide her direct funds to hire a lawyer of her own to sort of help her with that employment discrimination issue. And thank you, Dr. Bell, for putting those two links in the chat. So those are the two other things I'd add.
So I'm going to pivot now to the question. So the first question, and I think is from an anonymous attendee, and it's, what is your go-to banned book to recommend to others, and why do you recommend it?
Well, you know, so many books have been banned at some point, then you have a lot of choice there, right? Pick your favorite book. There's a chance it's been banned by someone at one point. So we could name almost any book that we like here, but maybe I'll just pick one here for simplicity's sake. I'm sure many people watching this have heard of Fahrenheit 451. It is actually a satire about the danger of banning books and the toxic effect of those bans on critical thinking. And it was banned repeatedly during the early 2000s, which I think is an irony that the people doing the banning probably did not notice at the time. If you guys have not read this recently, it's worth checking out as an adult. You might have only encountered it in high schools. Fahrenheit 451 is a 1953 American novel by Ray Bradbury. It's set in a future dystopia where books are banned, where TV screens are the size of whole walls. This is something that gets James's blood pressure up, I think. And where firemen set fires of books instead of putting out fires. And the protagonist is a fireman named Guy Montag, and he begins to question why books are being banned in the first place. And that book itself was banned. By the way, if you ever wonder about the title, Fahrenheit 451, why it's called that, it's because according to Bradbury, 451 degrees Fahrenheit is the temperature at which paper ignites. So that's well worth taking a look at.
So I was recently rereading that, and much as I do cherish Ray Bradbury, and I love that book, I also it raises so many questions for me, because it's like, they really, you know, years into dystopia, they still have enough books that there's a full-time job just burning books. Like, shouldn't they ban printing books? If they're really that keen on like getting rid of books, they have a whole brigade of guys, and their one job is to set books on fire, but they don't go with a printing presses. It just doesn't make any sense. Also, for somebody who doesn't know, whose ostensible job is to just burn books whenever he sees them, which I guess he's paid for full time. What's going on economically in this society? Anyway, I would say the vibes are incredible, but if you start thinking about any one detail of the book, you're like, this society is falling apart. They should have prioritized other things.
But just to be clear, your critique is this book should not be banned because of those plot holes, but instead I should get to write a screed about the plot holes in Fahrenheit 451.
Oh, precisely. I want everyone to read it so I can so I can do, you know, like 20 minutes of this somewhere, and people can be like, yes, I too share your concerns, and I'm laughing with you, or I disagree and you missed the best vibes.
Although I feel like it's like, is the problem at the side of consumption, the reader, or the side of the production of the book, right? There's like what your question makes me think about, which is, you know, we've got well over 100 years of banning books by queer people. You know, like if you think about it, it's happening from the side of production. But that's another rant that I will look forward to later. The book that I would suggest is one that I read recently, Mike Corrado, Flamer. It's a graphic novel about a boy at Boy Scout camp sort of coming to terms with his sexuality and how complicated that is in a homosocial environment, and being in a cabin with a bunch of boys. And you read it and it's like so sweet, you know, it's just like one of the sweetest, quietest, most perfect reads I've read in a long time. It's like sort of perfectly, your heart cracks when you read it. And then to think that there are people who want to eliminate the book because they want to eliminate people like the character in the book is just sort of crushing and devastating. And I think for me, it brought home how human this is, because, like, of course, I operate mostly in the layer of public outrage, right, about all of this. So to have a moment with a book that shows you what it really means, I think that's a good one. I'd recommend it.
Well, I've always loved Art Spiegelman's work, so A Mouse would be the one. But I don't pay too much attention to, the yammering from that side. As you can tell, I'm more concerned about, what we need to do on our side of the table.
And speaking of your side of the table, the next question says, could Mr. McBride discuss his latest book in a little more detail in terms of how novels help develop critical thinking skills?
Man, I'm not that smart. I mean, I don't know. I mean, and then in a novel, everything must connect. The characters must connect. Everything is connected to everything, which is connected to everything. And so I suppose, because I try to write from a place where people try to move to the good. See, journalism teaches you what's wrong. My books try to teach you what works, and what is right. And I think that when we're talking about libraries being the most vulnerable places, it's because they're what's right, and they're the one jewel, they're the one diamond on the beach that sits there, and people come along and everyone's allowed to have a kick at it. So, I say put a gate around it, or kick back, one or the other. But I can't answer that question in a way that makes me sound smart. I really don't know. I just do it. The story is there. It's one time they were asking this drummer in the studio, they said, play that again. And the guy said, I can't, it was in the air. And so for a novel, it's just in the air. The critical thing, or the magic of books, is just something that we have to get young people into the room to experience. And so some of the ideas that we talked about earlier, we have to just keep the gateway open, and then they can decide for themselves how the critical thinking thing works for them in my book or any book.
And I think that was a very erudite answer, because literally Plato is just, he's like, if you want to, he said exactly the same thing about creativity. So I feel like, yeah, that you can't get more detailed than that. We also have a question that's like, an anonymous attendee saying, how do you think the publishing industry should be involved in this issue? And now, I guess most of us are on the receiving end of the publishing industry. So but if anyone has suggestions,
we've seen publishers get involved recently, because I think they definitely have a stake in producing a literate public, right? They have a stake in people reading books, and they've been parties to lawsuits brought in multiple courts against the Arkansas law, some laws in Arkansas and Texas and other parts of the country. And during Banned Books Week, Penguin Random House collaborated with folks to do a banned book bus tour, the bandwagon, I think they call it, the bandwagon, that drove through the American South handing out books. So we see a lot of activity there. And, I think that the publishing industry should be involved in continuing to produce books that would be subject to bans. Right? I hope that we see a lot more that's published that documents the experiences of people like me and people like other people in this room. We need a publishing industry that sees the value of those stories, and sees the value of those stories for children. I follow along some of the controversies that are happening around children's publishing right now, and it's important, I think, for publishing to maintain a commitment to the right to read for everybody, and for all of us to have access to the stories of our lives.
Yeah, and I think my plug would be, I think they should try not to make it easy. In terms of, if people want to go in and remove books, their job should be to let's make that as convoluted a process as possible, and not just be oh, here are the books that you probably want removed. Let's organize them nicely so you can take them away. That would be my thought.
ALA has we have, because just to go back to what Richard was talking about policies for book banning, and we do want challenges. We want people to demand more of public institutions, right? And we want to be funded in such a way that we can deliver, and that's important. But one of the techniques that a lot of libraries have been putting in place is a requirement that you read the book. If you're going to challenge it, you have to provide evidence that you've read the book, because that's the thing that cuts down the challenges. Instead of just one book, because people put in a list of 100, and you're prove it. You gotta have read it.
Exactly. For somebody who hates reading so much, it seems like you're claiming you've done an awful lot of it. But I'm seeing some more questions. Hang on. Whoa. So we're seeing another one. Do any of you see a role for poets and spoken word artists in the fight for the freedom to read?
Oh, there's clearly a role for every, creative, engaged citizen, regardless of what creative talents you bring to the table. I think one of the messages Emily's been delivering loud and clear today is that everyone can play a role in this fight, and it's a collective fight for a collective common good. But thinking historically, we could certainly say that in any meaningful civil rights campaign in American history, which this one certainly qualifies, we've seen the activation of a broad array of creative people, whether that's artists. I think of George Catlin, who tried to protest native expulsion in the 1830s in Andrew Jackson's America by depicting Western native leaders in portraiture, hundreds and hundreds of portraits showing the cultural variety of the native groups facing expulsion. I think of great literary figures like I mentioned Harriet Beecher Stowe, whose politics and expression is problematic today, but back then seemed like a loud and clear voice for the anti-slavery fight. Frederick Douglass from Maryland, of course, not just one of the greatest anti-slavery politicians of his generation, but one of our greatest anti-slavery writers and speakers, speaking of spoken word, in American history. So there's always a role for orators, there's always a role for creative people. You will not find a meaningful civil rights campaign in American history where creative people, including spoken word artists, including poets, have not played central roles. And so it behooves us all to call upon the creative people we know and revere today. And James McBride's presence here is proof that that call is already being heeded to engage in this civil rights struggle. And for all our most notable, most celebrated, most successful creative artists to put their own comforts aside temporarily and engage in what is a civil rights fight.
I completely agree with you, Professor. I just got an email or something about something I heard through the grapevine that Jay-Z had some kind of big event for him at the Brooklyn Public Library. I know Spike Lee has given them money or materials. We have to be involved. We can't sit. This is a grassroots problem that as far as poets and spoken word at libraries, absolutely. And I see that happens quite a bit. Librarians are ingenious. They are brilliant at yanking in people and making communities come together. They are not the problem here. But the short answer to the question is yes, absolutely. Spoken word is actually, I won't say a library has to become a jazz club, but a library can become a place of expression for the magic of what words can do. And young people, it is a really good way of pulling, your best and most creative young people into the building. And it's been done. It's being done. And I encourage librarians to continue to do it.
I think we have two more questions, and then you all have been so wonderful and so generous with your time. I've just really gotten a grand time out of this. So one is from anonymous attendee saying, Deacon King Kong had some of the kindest characters, as did Heaven and Earth Grocery. Do you always look for the best in people when you write?
Well, I don't want this to devolve into my, the James McBride show. Look, the best people are the kinds of people who are in libraries. I wrote part of The Color of Water in the Brooklyn Public Library. Every time you need a break in the world, just go to the library. These are the safe havens for the young people of the world. Yes, of course, because the kind people of the world are the ones who are really doing everything. It's like church. There's 10 people and 2 people do everything. It's like that everywhere. It's like that in this business too. In the library, there's 18 librarians, 2 of them do everything. Well, we celebrate those 2 and let the other 16 come along for the chips and beer. But yes, because that's how I see the world, and that's what the world is. That's why we're here having this conversation.
And a final one is, what's your guess for what the most challenged book for 2023 will be? I'm curious, so I can pick it up from the library and read it right away. Which is more of a comment than a question, but I guess if we have any guesses.
I love the question, and I wish I had a crystal ball. But my guess is that if you go to the library and you ask for a book about Black experience or queer experience or Indigenous experience, or you'll probably have a shot, at picking up the one that wins.
Agreed.
Yeah, but everyone go to your library, pick up a book, and support your libraries in all the ways we've discussed, and even more ways we haven't discussed. And thank you to everyone for being here. And if you have any final words in the last 2 minutes, shout them forth.
Just thank you to everyone at this library system who put this event on, a reminder of everything that the praise we've heaped on library systems. We're enjoying one of the proofs of concept right here with this open-ended discussion, and I walk away very hopeful about the future of libraries, the hope for young citizens maturing into adult citizens. And I think that libraries fundamentally are the oxygen of democracy, and we should all do well to keep that in mind.
Thank you for your support of library workers everywhere. I hear it loud and clear from Dr. Bell and from James McBride, and look forward to sharing your comments with my colleagues as I move forward. And the number one thing you can do, use your library. Go get a library card, take a friend, get your friend to get a library card. These are public institutions, and we got to use them or lose them. And thanks to the staff at Howard County for having me here today. I appreciate it so much.
Agreed.
You're here. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and have a great Sunday. Thank you so much for your time.
All right.
Bye-bye.
See you guys later.
Bye-bye.